We did not finish the class last time. We got maybe halfway through, so we're going to finish that class this morning. This is the fourth class of the second part. We were just beginning to come into the thick part of this class, of this particular lesson. Let's find the slide we're on. This might be worth reviewing. In which world, we could think about this, in which world do we live? We live in the world of the Serpentine Ouroboros or the world of the Trinitarian perichoresis. You know those terms now? Remember, we introduced them to you last week. You remember those terms? All right? The Ouroboros is the impersonal circle, life circle. The perichoresis is the personal circle of life of the Holy Trinity that does not consume its children. In fact, it gives its life to its children. This is where we are. So this morning, last morning we started coming into Eden. This morning we're going to take a full step and go into Eden. This is from St. Callistos Angelicudis in the fifth volume of the Philokalia. I wonder. No, that has no effect. I thought I might make it bigger for you, but I can't. This is what he says. Visible things, are images depicting the invisible things of man. Thus, the exceedingly beautiful Garden of Paradise is an icon of the inner man. His heart is the earth and soil, and the plants are the things freely planted by the intellect. The Greek word is nous. You find that in many of the Orthodox writings that you're reading. If they don't translate it as intellect, they might choose not to translate it because it's hard to translate. It has no word in English that matches it directly. You think they translate it as intellect. They mean to distinguish the intellect from the mind. But even with the intellect, that has for us still has a cerebral connotation. The intellect is the intelligent faculty. St. Gregory of Nazianzus, for example, calls it the most essential part of our human nature. It's housed within the heart, like the priest in the temple. The intellect is that capacity of our nature to see God directly and to comprehend, to perceive God and to communicate with God. It's deep in the heart, and so that's why you find that the many Orthodox writers, as they're translating from the Greek to the English, they struggle how to translate this word, and I think that it's becoming commonplace to translate it as intellect. Rarely will you find them translating it as mind. They might translate it as spirit. You could translate it as spirit. It goes to St. Paul's word, where is it, in one of the Corinthian letters? The spirit of the man, how does he say? The spirit of the man knows the man. Like the Spirit knows God, it's the Spirit who knows God, pneuma, and I think you could also translate it as icon. But anyway, moving on. Freely planted by the intellect, created according to the icon of God, which is to say, the many and various contemplations relating to God, as well as divine perceptions and even divine manifestations. These contain variety in all sorts of forms and spiritual fragrances, and they further provide nourishment, contentment, and of course pleasure. The Garden of Eden signifies the heart that is naturally cultivated and takes conscious enjoyment and pleasure in things divine. That last sentence is powerful. Lots to think of in that last sentence. The Garden of Eden signifies the heart that is naturally cultivated, and both of those words, naturally cultivated You don't let it grow wild. You cultivate it. But what's cultivated is natural. It grows naturally from the soil of the heart and takes conscious enjoyment and pleasure in things divine. Drawing from past classes, not only with the adult ed, but also with the catechisms, we could say that the life force, that is causing the plants in the garden to grow, that life force that is causing the movement of the soul and the mind, so that the mind is always in movement, the soul is always in movement. They're doing the things that are proper to their particular faculty, like the mind is always thinking, the soul is always feeling. There's an energy that's causing all of that movement. And again, drawing from past classes from the Holy Fathers, that movement would be eros, love. It's the movement, the eros, you could say, is the movement of nous, the intellect. The spirit that is deep within us, the kind of the core that's within the heart. The eros is the nous, the intellect, moving out of itself, seeking a beloved to whom it can belong to. Is seeking for union, for something outside of itself. That erotic desire, as we said in past classes, is implanted in our nature by God Himself, so that we are in natural movement. We exist in erotic movement. We exist in this erotic movement in which we are constantly, you can't stop it. That's how you exist, that's who you are, that's what you are. You try to kill the eros, you kill yourself. It's this movement within us that is constantly, always, inexorably moving out, looking for God. That's what we're doing. We're looking for God because He's the beloved. Remember, He's the bridegroom who comes at midnight. He's the only lover of mankind. That's who the soul is looking for, longing for, moving out toward. And so you can see then how the serpent has taken that erotic longing, that movement, and he has perverted it. He's turned it on its ear. He's turned it away from God, so that now instead of going out of ourselves into God, we go out of ourselves into the creation, the tree of learning good and evil. And we fasten that, we attach that, the power of that erotic energy, not onto God, who alone can satisfy it, but we attach it to the things of the world, the things of creation, and chiefly, you might say, our own bodies. Pornography, sexual immorality. This gives the theology as to why those are so powerfully addicting. We project God onto them. We make them into our God. We worship them as our God. And we look for the pleasure that only God can give from them. And so, as I said, we're getting into the thick of it today. The nous, as I was explaining just a moment ago, the nous denotes the true self. It is the spiritual organ housed in our heart that is possessed naturally of the capacity to see God and to know God. It is, as it were, the point of our union with God in theosis. We see the self in movement, actively employing its energy. That's what I was just trying to describe. We see the self in movement, actively employing its energy, its free, here's another thing. I say it's energy, and then I put in apposition to that word energy, I put free will. Eros is free, is it not? Love is free. your free will is the expression of your erotic energy. And so actively employing its free will, its energia, to working and keeping or guarding in obedience to the divine commandment all the herbage in the garden planted by God. So that'd be all, as he was saying, that would be all of your thoughts, all of your feelings, all the movements of your inner man, all the movements of the emotions, the thoughts, the reasonings. Everything needs to be guarded and cultivated, naturally cultivated, so that that energy is being, that movement is being directed towards its natural end, its natural beginning and end, because that movement comes from God, and it is wanting to end in God, is wanting to come to rest in God. There's the mystery of the Sabbath rest. So you know, the Sabbath rest of God, God in the tomb. Well, St Macarius of Egypt says somewhere else, he was in the 4th century. St. Callistos was in the 14th. St. Macarius was in the 4th century. He says, the tomb is our heart, because we have given our heart to the devil, to the serpent. Now the serpent and all of his vipers, his children, you know, they walk through our heart like they would walk on highways. And so when we give our heart, ourself, to the serpent as our bridegroom, well, our heart becomes a tomb. We become dead men towards God. So the Sabbath rest of God in, God, the Lord Jesus Christ in the tomb. Okay, that's the visible image. Going back to what St. Callistos is saying, that visible things are images depicting the invisible things of man, the inner man. So here's the visible image that we're getting ready to move toward, Pascha. We're coming into Great Lent. We're going to get ready to move towards Pascha. We come first to the tomb of Lazarus, and then we come to the Lord's tomb. 2 tombs we're coming to, as though 2 hearts, two chambers. I think the tomb of Lazarus somehow is our own heart that has been put to death by our love for the serpent, becoming more like Lucifer than by God. So we're right now, we're moving in Lent, we're moving towards the tomb of Lazarus. We want to come to rest after having put to death all that's earthly in us. You know, as St. Paul would say, crucify the passions of the flesh. And then he would list them: fornication, adultery, lust, anger, malice, gluttony, sexual immorality, bad thoughts, bad speech. Put all of that to death. Die. Lose your life, is what Christ would say. Lose your life for my sake, so that you can get buried in the tomb of Lazarus. And then you hear the Lord calling out, come forth. And he raises us up from out of our death that we have voluntarily done on ourselves, out of love for Christ. And then what does he do? He calls us to follow him into his tomb, which is a new tomb. No one had been laid in it. It's a virginal tomb. And it's the bridal chamber. But it's also it's our heart that has been cleansed. So he's bringing us into his tomb, and he's laid to rest in the tomb. He's resting himself. You know, how did he come out of himself in the first place? Through his erotic love for us. And out of that erotic movement, he comes out of himself, and he becomes bone of our bones, flesh of our flesh. That's marriage language. That's nuptial language. And having become bone of our bones, flesh of our flesh, he doesn't stop even there. Out of his love for us, he keeps going until he's one with us even in our death. So that the image of Christ in the tomb is the image of this God in erotic love for us, coming out of himself and uniting himself in the mystery of the marriage of Christ and his church, the mystery of the marriage of the gospel, uniting himself to us so completely that he becomes one with us even in our death. So, and he comes to rest in his love for us. So, you might say that's what Great Lent is all about. We are preparing the tomb of our heart out of our erotic love for God. We're going to take our erotic love. We're going to tear it away from the earth, from all the perversions that the world wants us to give it to. We're going to tear it away from that, and we're going to give our erotic love to Christ. And we're going to prepare our heart, like the tomb of Lazarus, to become the resting place of God's love for us. So visible things are images depicting the invisible things of man. The image of Christ in the tomb, the image of Lazarus in the tomb, these are visible things, but they are depicting an invisible reality. This is what gives to these gospel images their meaning. It's what gives them their power and their force. They're not just stories. They're not just stories. They are icons of reality, the reality of your soul. And so that image of Pascha, Christ in the tomb, that's the image of God in his love. To rest in his love in us. So Pascha is it's the mystery of God loving us and us returning that. That's why St. John will say, we love him who first loved us. We didn't die to Christ. We died out of love for ourselves. But Christ died for us. And he opened the way. He opened the garden. He opened the way to Eden. So now he's calling us like he calls Lazarus. He says, come forth. Come forth. Come forth. And come into the garden. The entrance to that garden is the Lord's tomb. Which is to say that the entrance to your heart is the Lord's tomb. The Lord's death. By which he has given himself to us completely. As I said a couple weeks ago, I'm talking to you. I'm not talking to your kids. I'm leaving it to you to translate this for your children to understand. But first of all, you have to understand it. You have to digest it. This has to become your possession. This bit of knowledge, and then you have to decide. You are the mother and the father of your children. I'm not. So it is your calling, your vocation, to teach this to your kids. And as I said, I'd love to know how you're going to do it. But this is what you want to teach them somehow. So the nous, or the self, that is within the heart then, comes into view as Adam placed in the garden. Adam, who is just newly fashioned from the good earth. Because remember, the ground was not yet cursed as a result of the transgression of disobedience. It has not yet become the dust of death. That's how the psalmist calls it. And he was made a living soul by the breath of life, which is the Holy Spirit that God breathed into Adam's face. You don't know what to do with this. But in the larger picture of this, of God, of us coming into existence, of us being created as an act of God's love, God coming out of himself, as St. John of Damascus says, God, the Holy Trinity it was like he was just so abundantly filled with love that he came out of himself in that love, and out of that love he created us. So we are not, to say that we are created in the image of God is to say that we are created in the love of God. So that we exist from the very moment of our conception, or the very instant that we're conceived. We exist in this love of God. Whether or not your parents were loving one another when they conceived you, nonetheless, when you were conceived, there's a bigger picture than your mom and dad, right? You came to existence. Remember what it says in Psalm 139, God knew about you. He knew you even before you were being fashioned in your mother's womb. He knew you. So that you're coming to be, even from your mom and dad, that is taking place from within the larger picture of you being known by God from eternity, and you coming into existence in that knowledge of God. And in that knowledge, he didn't just know you, but he loved you, right? Because he's a God. He is love. So that Yeah, so we come into existence from the very even before we're conceived, however we're conceived. We come into existence in this love of God. And that is the reality in which we live and move and have our being. So you begin to have perhaps to catch the tragedy of Adam turning and Eve turning away from God. To follow the tree of learning good and evil, to follow the creation. Yeah, the creation is beautiful. And it was made for us to enjoy. But it was not made to be our God. The way we enjoy the creation so that it gives life is when we love God. You know, we do that here at every Divine Liturgy. We fast from food and drink from midnight on. We're preparing ourselves to receive God in Holy Eucharist. We receive Holy Eucharist, which is the tree of life, where we are eating and drinking from the fruit of the tree of life. And after we have eaten from the tree of life, now we come downstairs and we eat from the tree of learning good and evil. Coffee hour. Now we can enjoy the creation. Because now we have offered the creation to God. He has filled it with himself. Now he gives it back to us, filled with himself. You see how it would happen if we don't love God and we just take the creation and enjoy it on its own. Well, it's not filled with God because we didn't offer it to. It's filled with ourselves. So when we eat it, when we enjoy the creation without having given it to God, it can't give us life. You can follow what I'm trying to say. But what I'm driving at is that, you look at this phrase in Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, that God breathed into Adam's face or into his nostrils. It kind of looks like a kiss. Actually, it goes even deeper than that. The word for living soul in the Hebrew, nephesh, actually refers to the throat area. It's translated into the Greek as psyche. Well, in the Greek, the soul is the fluids, the seminal fluids that flow through our bodies. In both male and female, they have the bitter waters, the sweet waters, as it says in the Pneuma Elish, referring to these fluids. Well, that's the psyche, the soul. But in Hebrew, the soul is the nephesh. It's this area, the throat, the nose, the mouth. So when it says that God breathed into Adam's face and he became a living soul, he became a living nephesh, it's telling us what? That we live according to what we breathe, eat, and drink. Now it begins to make sense, does it not? We live by breathing God. We live by eating and drinking from the fruit of the tree of life, Christ. That's what makes us live. That's why the Lord tells the Pharisees, I'm the living bread that comes down from heaven. I'm the living cup that comes down from heaven. Unless you eat my body and drink my flesh, you have no life in you. Because you were made a living soul when the Holy Spirit of my Father was breathed into you. And then what was the next commandment? Guard the garden. But I think even before that it was, it's don't eat from the tree of life, but rather don't eat from the tree of learning good and evil, but eat from the tree of life. In other words, your goal now is to eat from Christ, is become a partaker of the divine nature, as St. Peter would say. That's your goal. In other words, deny yourself. Lose your life. Isn't that interesting? The Lord's commandment, Mark chapter 8, I think it's verse 37, is the same commandment he gave to Adam in the garden. It's the same commandment. Deny yourself. Take up your cross. Take up your cross. What could we say? I think we could say, take up your erotic energy. Because what is the cross of Christ if it is not the emblem of his erotic energy, of his erotic love? Because it was out of his erotic love for us that he ended up on the cross. So take up your cross. Take up your erotic desire. Take it up. and follow Christ. Don't follow the harlot, as the Proverbs is telling us all over the place. Don't go chasing after the harlot. Give your love to Christ, and he will satisfy you with every so anyway, you begin to see that the picture that is being drawn of man in the Bible, that man is a living throat. He eats, drinks, and he breathes by what he lives by what he eats, drinks, and breathes. And so if he's eating and drinking and breathing the air, the food, and the drink of the tree of the creation, okay, well, he's going to go back to the dust. He's going to go back to the nothingness that the creation came from. He's going to go back to the dust he came from. But if he's eating, drinking, and breathing God, he's going to go to the God in whom he was created at the very beginning. Even outside of himself. You came into being from outside of yourself. You came into a being from within Christ. Outside of yourself. So that you exist just by our very nature. We exist in this erotic movement that is all, because if the erotic movement begins outside of ourselves in God, then where's that erotic movement going? That's why it's taking us out of ourselves. It's wanting us to get out of ourselves and into God. So that's why erotic energy is ecstatic. It's an ecstasis. Ek, out of, stasis, to stand. So ecstasy is to stand out of yourself. I'm sorry, I'm going off text, and we're probably not going to finish this class again this morning. But as you can see, as I said, we're getting into the thick of it. Because what I just said, that erotic energy is by its very nature ecstatic. It's an ecstasis. Well, that takes me right away. It takes me back to the myrrh-bearing women at the tomb. I think it's in Mark's Gospel. You remember the story. They come to the tomb. They wonder who's going to roll the stone away. Okay, well, there's a story there. There's a theology there. And they discover that the stone is already rolled away. They go into the tomb. The angel tells them, you're looking for Jesus of Nazareth. He's not here. He's risen. Go and tell Peter and his disciples, he goes before you to Galilee. And then what do the myrrh-bearer women do? They jump up and down and say, oh, goody, he's risen. No, they flee in terror and trembling. And it says, in ecstasis. They were ecstatic. They were outside of themselves. That, you wonder if the gospel writer there is alluding to the Dionysiac frenzies, the Maenads. I might not getting the terms right. Where the women chase after Dionysius, and they fall into an ecstasis. But their ecstasis is demonic. And the Dionysius, the god that they're going after, is one of the devil's serpents. And they tear the king, they tear him apart, limb from limb, in their frenzy, in their ecstatic frenzy. So it's like, you wonder if Mark is alluding to that. He's wanting to point out, guys, there's another ecstasis, there's another ecstasy that does not destroy, that does not kill. There's another ecstasis, another ecstasy that actually brings life. Anyway, moving on. God was in him. God was in Adam, like a fire burning in the bush on Mount Horeb that was not consumed. For created in the image of God, man is fire, created in fire. But again, these terms that we're using, they're pregnant, if you will. They're pregnant with theology. What would be another word that we could substitute for fire? How about eros? How about love? Erotic love. For created in the image of God, who is love, who is eros. Man is erotic desire, created in erotic desire. Again, I'm not making that up. That's from St. Maximus the Confessor. God is, You know, he puts Greek philosophy, he just throws it, he just turns it on its ear when he says that God is in movement. God is in movement. It's an erotic movement. The Father coming out of himself into the Son coming out of himself into the Father, all the persons coming out of themselves and being received by the other person, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. This is what produces the perichoresis circle of life in the Holy Trinity. So that here you might say this is the definition, as close as we can get to the definition of a person. It's actually also said, I think, in the prayer that the priest is saying, while you're singing the mystical cherubim, the priest is saying a prayer, and he concludes the prayer with this: "For thou, O Christ, art the offerer and the offered, the receiver and the received." Another, the lover and the beloved. That's the definition of a person. One who offers and receives. One who loves and is beloved. That's the definition of a person. And that erotic love is fire. Well, fire is warm. Fire is hot. Love is hot. Love is warm. But then there's there's an erotic love that gets hot, right? So that it consumes you. And I think you can experience that when you're looking at an impure, salacious image. You know, you can feel the fire just pouring into you. The fire of that demonic eros pouring into you. It's like the rush that you get when that image hits you. It's like you just gotten bitten by the serpent, and you can feel its venom like a poison just flooding your soul. And what does it do? It like the serpent's venom, it mesmerizes you. You can't move. You're at its mercy. It does what you do what it wants you to do. And you keep following it, it will destroy you. It will destroy your capacity for intimacy. You won't be able to love. You won't have that power anymore because it was destroyed by the serpent. So, created in the image of God, in this erotic warmth of God, we are love, created in love, fire, created in fire. Imagine how fragrant and truly delightful the Garden of Adam's inner man was. Imagine how fragrant and delightful the inner man of the harlot is. Oh, she's beautiful on the outside, but don't get to know her. She's a witch. She'll chew you up. Christ was, what does Isaiah the prophet say? He having no form or beauty that we should desire him. But look at the beauty of his inner man, beauty of his spirit. He gives life. He gives himself. He raises to life. And this fragrance and beauty of Adam's inner man, this is the essence of man as male and female in his original beauty and fragrance and glory. In other words, this fragrance of divine eros, this warmth of divine fire, this is your essence. This is you in your original beauty, fragrance, and glory. And it has not been lost. It's just been buried underneath layers and layers and layers of dirt, stinking dirt, but it's still there. This is what you are in your true self, at your root, at that point where you burst into being, into light, in fire, in glory. Guess what? We're at the end again. I've only got the 2 slides, but let's just close with a reflection on Great Lent now. This tells us what Great Lent is all about. We're gonna hear the command, deny yourself. Take up your cross, take up your eros, your erotic desire, and follow Christ. He is the source of that erotic desire. So you see, when you follow Christ, you're not going away from your erotic desire. You're going to where your erotic desire wants to go. You may not want to go there because you're in love with a perverse erotic desire. But that's why it's good news to hear that you're free. You're free. And you can choose to go where you don't want to go. You can be like the Gergesene demoniac. The demons did not want him going to the Lord, right? They wanted to go the other way. They wanted to flee. Who won? There was a legion of demons. A legion. Just one puny man against a legion of demons. Who won that tussle? Who won that arm wrestling match?
Amen.
The demoniac, yes. I want to see Jesus. He went to Jesus. And the demons had to go with him, screaming and trembling and crying out to the Lord, don't do anything, don't torment us before the time, bro. You have that power. And when we follow Christ, even if you don't want to follow Christ in your body, your soul, nonetheless, you have a self, you have an intellect, you have a nous, you have a spirit. And the beauty of this gospel is that it's like it's waking up your nous, your spirit. It's waking it up so that you are learning who you really are. So now you don't believe the lie that the serpent is telling you. You are not a sex creature. You are an image of God. This is who you are. This is where you find your fulfillment, is in the communion of God. So with your spirit, with yourself, exercise your free will and choose to go after Christ. Lose your life for his sake. In other words, out of love for Christ, lose your life for him. How do you lose your life? Okay, well, you be obedient to his commandments. And what are his commandments? Deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. Lose your life for my sake. But what are those commandments? What are they in their essence? What are they in their essence? Deny yourself, take up your cross, follow me, lose your life for my sake in the gospel. Are not those commandments in their essence the commandment to love God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, and your neighbor as yourself? So that's what we're doing in Great Lent. When we deny ourselves, take up our cross, the ascetic disciplines of the church, in order to crucify the flesh with its passions, to put to death all that's earthly in us. What we're putting to death, what we're crucifying, is this perverse erotic desire that has got us all wrapped up in coils in the serpent's lair. We're putting that to death because we can. The Lord has given us that power in our free will, and we're giving our erotic energy to God, and we're going to make our way through 6 weeks. We're going to be working harder than normal, because we can't do this all year. That's why we only do it for 6 weeks. Only the monastics can maybe do it all year, but we're just humble lay people. So we'll give it 6-7 weeks, but we're going to work as hard as we can in order to give our erotic desire to Christ and to prepare our heart to become the tomb, the resting place, the Sabbath rest, for God's love to rest in us, so that we can rest in God. All right. All right. God bless. Let's go upstairs and let's start doing this work.